Here's a good example of a device that talks over HTTP but actually makes it a little bit hard to proxy traffic. I can't go into these guys and define a proxy. I can connect them to a wireless network, but that's the extent of it. So it begs the question, how would we capture traffic from my Withings scales? Well, there are a few different options, and I want to start by looking at some hardware options. And the purpose of this is to demonstrate that everything that talks over HTTP provides you with an opportunity to monitor the API communications. Let's look at those hardware devices. So here are two simple ways of intercepting traffic. And the one on the left is a Wi-Fi Pineapple. This is a device that I often use in my presentations when I talk about the importance of transport layer security. I won't go into the details of it here, and you may actually see this show up in more detail in a later course, but for now, all you need to understand is that this can act as a wireless access point. Not only can it act as a wireless access point, but it can log every single packet that goes through it. So I could take my Withings scales, connect them to my Wi-Fi Pineapple, and then using a tool like TCP dump, which is commonly used for these sorts of purposes, I could save every single packet that goes through the device. That would give me enough information to see how those scales are communicating with the internet. That's pretty simple stuff. The device on the right is a LAN tap. This particular one is called a throwing star LAN tap, obviously due to its shape. The important thing in this context, though, is that it enables you to route traffic through an intermediary using Ethernet cables. So you can take a wired device, route it through the throwing star LAN tap, and again, capture all of those packets. Now, in both of these cases, the most basic way that you would do this is to capture what we refer to as PCAPs, packet captures. You might then use a tool like Wireshark to analyze those packet captures and discover things like the HTTP endpoints that the devices are talking to. What's in the query string? What's in post bodies? What are the responses from the APIs that it's connecting to? Effectively anything that you can do in Fiddler. And indeed, you could also go to the point of modifying IP tables and routing and actually route those HTTP requests back out through Fiddler running on another device. So there's lots of options in terms of how traffic is routed and intercepted when you can put something in the middle of the communication. But there's another mechanism that I want to touch on as well, and that's called ARP poisoning. Now, ARP poisoning is also often referred to as ARP spoofing, and ARP is the Address Resolution Protocol. And effectively what we're talking about here is convincing the target device that it should send its communications via a different route. Let me show you what I'm talking about. We'll take a scenario here where we have a device talking to a router which is then connected to the internet. Normally the traffic flows backwards and forwards like this. Now let's bring an attacker into the picture. And what the attacker is going to do is, instead of routing that device through the router over to the internet, the attacker is going to trick the device into communicating with him instead. So it looks more like this. Device goes through the router to the attacker, and the attacker then goes back out to the internet, and vice versa. So this is just another form of a man-in-the-middle attack. And in this case, it's one that you might do against your own device on a LAN in order to see how it's communicating with the internet. No need for HTTP proxies, and instead the attacker might use software like, say, Cain and Abel is a popular one for executing an ARP poisoning attack. The details don't matter too much. The point I want to get across is that there are multiple means of intercepting the communication between a device and an API back end. That's important because, again, I want to reiterate the point that everything the device is doing, whatever device, when it comes to communication over the internet, it can be discovered and intercepted. So hopefully, over the course of this module, it's now pretty clear that watching how a device communicates to the internet is a very trivial exercise.